Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage Method Space, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Dahlia Remler and Greg Van Rizen, who have just published a third edition of Research Methods in Practice. And this fits very well with our discussion on Sage Method Space about understanding, learning about, explaining problems in the real world in ways that produce findings that people can actually use. So before we get started, if you are new to Method Space, I'd just like to give you a brief introduction. This is a blog community hosted by Sage Publishing, and we're interested in all things to do with conducting, designing, planning, conducting, analyzing research, then writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways to create some impact. And you can see at the middle of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a student researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. So without further ado, I'd like to just ask the two of you to briefly introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Dahlia Remler. I'm on the faculty at the Mark School of Public and International Affairs at Broad College, which is at City University of New York. And I teach research methods to our Masters of Public Administration and International Affairs students. And I've been teaching professional master's students about research methods for a long time now, 20 years, I think. And I'm an economist by training, and I've worked on health policy in interdisciplinary settings for a long time.
Great. Greg?
Yeah, hi, I'm Greg Van Rizen. I'm a professor in the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Rutgers University, the campus in Newark. And I'm a psychologist by training. I have a kind of a background in survey research and program evaluation, and I teach research methods also regularly, as Dahlia has. In fact, that's where we met years ago when we started working on this book. We were teaching the same course and began sharing notes and ideas, and that sort of led to the book. And we had we've been kind of collaborating ever since. And I teach also to mostly master's students in public administration, but also some other students who take the course from other departments, global affairs, criminal justice, sometimes urban affairs. And then I also teach a version of the research methods course for our doctoral program. And so I use the book there also. And my substantive work has been, I've done different work on different policy areas. Earlier in my career, I worked in housing policy. More recently, I've worked on survey research about people's perceptions and evaluations of urban services, municipal government services. And it's good to be with you today.
I think that you're, for both of you, coming from the policy and public administration side, method space, because we are working research methods, which is not discipline specific, really look for opportunities to kind of share expertise across disciplines. And I think that at this time, people in many fields are looking for, how to research matters that have to do, broadly speaking, with the public. So, the title of your book, has, you talk about, research and practice, and you talk about real world research. I wondered if you would just start by explaining what you mean by that term.
Yeah, so we use the phrase research in the real world. And by that, we mean research and analysis that investigates whatever real world it is that people are aware of and concerned about, crime, learning, poverty, earnings, homelessness, whatever it is. And also health and health status, but more the social, societal factors driving that, not so much the physiology. But we also mean by real world research that we're looking at how government agencies, businesses, nonprofits, teaching, schools, universities use research every day. And they may not call it research. So tracking metrics, surveying clients, customers, employees, trying to evaluate new initiatives, hey, we had this new quality improvement program. Did it work? What did it do? So that kind of research is not published, but it's an important activity in society, and it's really important skills for students and pretty much everyone in every field. There's so much data around, quantitative data, qualitative data, so on. Like, how do you use it in an organization or in any job?
Right. And I think, you kind of good lead into my next question about, why it's valuable for students to, be prepared to conduct this kind of research. And, I think today, one of the topics we are discussing on method space right now, kind of has to do with the kind of career preparation that may be beyond academia. And as you've described, it's, there are a lot of ways that these kinds of skills could be used. But, what other, kind of value added do you see for students to be exposed to real world research?
Well, let me jump in. I think, one of the things is that we very much made the book focused on those kinds of skills that we think are increasingly important for students to have, not just in academia or students are going into research, but as Dahlia mentioned, a kind of the wide range of careers and organizations that make use of data. I mean, we live in a world that's increasingly sort of data driven. We've got much more electronic data than we had before. All kinds of big data are being created sort of on a daily basis. And it's much easier to share and access data. And so those sorts of skills of how to sort of, how to kind of think about evidence and how to kind of use data, and the skills to both to analyze data, but also to interpret evidence we believe are important for a lot of different careers. It's important in the healthcare industry. It's important in education. It's important in the foundation world and in human services and transportation, environmental protection, and criminal justice, and all of those fields. The courts, they are all very much more data-driven and evidence-driven organizations. So our focus is very much in the book on trying to get students the kind of the conceptual tools and the experience and the examples to really sort of gain confidence and skills and sort of, participating in that kind of professional activity.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on one thing that Greg just said. We put a lot into making students able to interpret research and analysis. So yes, do your own, and yes, commission it, but also if someone presents something, don't be misled by false conclusions, figure out what's useful. So that's a really big emphasis of ours.
Right. Yeah, and just, I think, to underline, what you were just, both of you were just saying. I mean, people are overwhelmed with data and, sorting out what is actual evidence that you can use when you are making a decision, whether it's a personal or organizational decision. I think, really essential basic skills that people need today, independent of whether they are preparing to conduct their own research. There was one quote that I pulled out in the from your book. A central theme of causation versus description runs through the text, emphasizing the idea that causal research is essential to understanding the origins of social problems and their potential solutions. So, could you, talk a little bit about how you address that and why it's important?
So, there's first kind of why is causal research so important? So applied social and policy research is kind of about making the world a better place, even if it's just in some little small way. So I think of that as like what works, meaning just changing something, some new program, a different way of doing things affect some outcome that we care about, high school graduation, crime, voting, whatever. And how well does it work? How big, if there's an effect, how big is it? Is it big enough to really matter? The jargon is practical significance that we really emphasize. So that's really important, but we also want to emphasize descriptive research versus causal research, just describing how the world is. And they're both really important. And you can't, of course, measure the impact of a program on an outcome until you can measure the outcomes and so on. So we really emphasize both. Some fields like economics, where I'm from, have been accused of being completely too obsessed with causal research now. Others are kind of like, well, if you can't do an experiment, you can't do causal research. This is descriptive. So we do try and do both properly, but also emphasize the difference.
Okay. So, there are obviously, lots and lots of books available about research methods. So, let's switch gears a little bit and talk, particularly about the book and what is distinctive or what differentiates this from other texts.
Yeah, well, let me respond to that. I think we very much sort of started from scratch when we wrote this book. We didn't sort of, have a model of a traditional research methods book. So we thought very carefully about sort of which topics we thought were most important to teach and for students to learn, especially kind of in this realm of more applied social and policy research. And so I think in some ways the structure of the book is a bit unique. We have some chapters that are not typical of other research methods books. For example, we've got, we have a chapter on theory and models, but it's very much focused on sort of practical model building, logic models, and figuring out cause and effect, at least potential cause and effect relationships through careful diagramming with causal diagrams, which is an important tool we use throughout the book, which is, that's quite a unique feature, I think, of the book. And we were one of the first textbooks of its kind to kind of get students into using the tool of a causal diagram early in the course and throughout throughout the other topics. Then we have some chapters on causation itself and how to think about that. We have a full chapter on natural and quasi experiments, which is kind of unique for a research methods book. And that's because those sorts of studies are really important in applied research. That the focus of our book is trying to get students to understand the actual research that's out there that they're likely to see in their field. And a great deal of those studies are not fully randomized experiments, although that, we have a chapter on that too, and that's an important topic. But the chapter structure, the use of causal diagrams is unique to the book. And I think the overall kind of focus on research that's most of the examples, nearly all the examples are research applied to public policy and important social issues, as opposed to more academic research.
Yeah, I mean, I think also our examples, they're not what I call throwaway examples. Like many of them go on for pages in which we really thoroughly,
Mhm.
how and why does community policing affect crime is in this edition as our example for the theory and models, and why the election polls went wrong in 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. How does gender affect earnings? How does education affect earnings? What is poverty and how do we want to measure it? So, we try and teach these concepts through these very applied and engaging examples. I
And I
think
think,
that's
I mean, those are the social problems, across the world and in every society. We're dealing with all kinds of things that, in many cases have been exacerbated by the pandemic in the last couple of years. So I think those are of great interest to students and would engage them. So when you think about the students who, you've kind of have in mind as the audience for this book, you're going to tell us a little bit more about that thought process.
yeah, so we wrote this book, like Greg said, for our students. When we first started writing it, I came to Berwick in 2004, and Greg was still there then, and we started writing a few chapters that we developed. And even after we had the book, there'll be something that particular students didn't understand, and we'll figure out how to do it, and we'll be drawing new diagrams, and those become new diagrams in this edition. Sorry, but what I was going to say to the students, we wrote it initially for professional master's students. So Masters of Public Administration, International Affairs. I had taught Masters of Public Health and Health Administration, but criminal justice, education, all those kinds of things. But we also really tried, in doing that, we knew that we needed to address students who came from very diverse backgrounds. Some people were English majors, some people were engineering majors. The students come from enormous wide backgrounds, and many of them are already working in the field. And again, some people are managers, some are in communications, some are staffers, and some are already doing data analysis. So we had to write the book for people who wouldn't necessarily start by knowing very much, but they might start by knowing a lot, or anywhere in between. And I think that was a really useful thing, because we didn't presume knowledge, but we also tried to make sure that we got to pretty advanced things. Like if something is complicated but important, we're not going to simplify that. We'll simplify as much as we possibly can. We work hard for that. But if it's important to have some complexity, we'll have it. So it's also used for upper division undergraduates in public policy, but also in psychology and political science and some of those disciplines. And it's also used in very applied doctoral programs. Often they'll supplement with more advanced things, but as Greg does, we get to those harder concepts. So it can be a lot of range of things. So, we wrote it for the applied professional programs, but we are seeing it used in some of the more traditional social sciences, because again, students like the very sort of real world pressing kinds of things.
So do you think this book would be useful for people as professional reading who are not students, but are confronting the kinds of dilemmas that we mentioned earlier of being overwhelmed by data and trying to figure out how to make sense out of it? Is it something that a professional could find value in working through?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we definitely had that type of reader in mind also when we were writing. I mean, I know a book like this is mostly used by students in a degree program, but we definitely had in mind the sort of the sort of self-taught kind of professional who wants to you know maybe has a new job or a new responsibility that involves research and data collection and analysis, and wants advice on how to, or a resource on how to kind of think about those sorts of things
Right.
and do that kind of work. Yeah, which is not too unlike our students. I mean, they're doing it for a degree program, but they're doing it studying these topics to develop professional skills and that they'll use on the job. And so
Right.
people who are already doing, or maybe given a new responsibility to do research work, like in a foundation or in a healthcare setting or whatever, and they haven't had that background, or it's been a while, the book would be well suited for that. I mean, it's very, I think, very much aimed at sort of people understanding these ideas on their own and getting practice and
Right.
kind of using it as a resource in that way.
Right. We have a lot of readers for method space who are independent scholars or consultants and people who do research in a variety of settings that are not academic and need to continue to build their skills. So it seems like it would be useful there. I want to
I-
just close by asking you
Oh,
to
can I
just,
just add
do you have
one
something you want to
thing?
add for that? Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly. I have had a lot of colleagues who've used the book for areas outside their expertise. So
Mhm.
someone who does communications, someone who maybe knows qualitative and survey research, learning about the quantitative, causal, natural, and quasi experiments, so on. Or like an economist, learning about qualitative research, how to write survey questions. So those are examples of people who do it that way.
Right.
Yeah,
Right, as a
we didn't write
practical
the
book.
we didn't really write the book with a particular disciplinary background in mind, like, or we didn't assume a particular disciplinary background. So it does sort of work for people who come at research, applied research, from very different backgrounds and angles. So
Yeah, so maybe just as we close to describe some of the new features or new topics that you cover in this third edition.
yeah, okay. Well, I'll start. I think I mean, the book is, well, it's a significant revision. I mean, we don't revise this book every couple of years. We sort of wait until we have meaningful revisions to do, and so there are a lot of updates and improvements throughout the book. We added a lot more figures and diagrams to explain ideas, because we think that kind of visual thinking works well, particularly in the sampling chapter, but also in the theory and models chapter. We included some new examples because social issues change over time since the last edition, and so we updated some examples. For example, we have some COVID-19 examples in the in the chapter on secondary data. We have some more coverage of big data, because that's become much more of an important tool in the all throughout society, but in the professional world in particular. Dahlia, do you want to jump in? And so those are the ones that, I mean, we've made so many sort of improvements and sort of changes throughout that it's
Yeah,
kind of difficult to summarize them all, but
there are some big changes. Like, as I say, we have media examples, and we have several new ones where we switched out an old one for a new one. But a lot, so there are big things like that. And we have a lot more like online methods for doing survey research and things like that. But there are also like a lot of little things buried in there, for like, students weren't getting it this way? How can we clarify that? And so a lot of that's in new diagrams, but some of it is just, you know, we rewrote a paragraph. So there are a lot of big scale differences, but I think there are a lot more like, there's just a lot of little small scale differences, both.
Yeah, I can think of, I mean, one interesting example is that the way that government surveys ask about race, ethnicity, and gender has become much more, you know, it's changed, and the way in which, you know, people identify with multiple races and multiple backgrounds, and how the Census Bureau tries to accommodate that. We've sort of discussed that, and even in the with the gender issue too, gender identity has become more complex, and social researches and government surveys have had to kind of recognize that. So that's like it's a small thing, but it plays an important role in the measurement chapter. And then when we show statistics by race ethnicity later on in the book, it gives more context for the way in which governments have sort of categorized people in that way, and we kind of make that a more explicit discussion in this edition, which I think is important for a lot of people, a lot of readers, a lot of our students, and for us too.
Yeah, you know, and whenever anything comes up in our teaching, you know, we mark up the book. I know I often finish class taking photos of the board for some new diagram or some new topic that came up. And the gender identity and race and ethnicity identity is definitely something that we had both experienced coming up, and so we made sure to add the content on that.
Great. Well, yes, it's kind of a field testing the text as an instructional tool while you're developing it. So thank you both for discussing kind of this angle of research generally, as well as with your book. And those watching this video can find some additional blog posts from Greg and Dahlia, and links to the book on the website.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thanks, Janet.